There is a specific kind of sadness that comes from standing in a field that used to be something and is now nothing. Not ruined land, not damaged land, not chemically destroyed or flooded or stripped, just forgotten. This 40-acre field in Polk County, Iowa, had been forgotten for 31 years. The family that farmed it had passed away, and the heirs had held the land for 3 decades without doing anything with it. Not farming it, not selling it, not thinking about it much at all. When I first saw it, in late October, it was chest-high in goldenrod and thistle, with young box elder and cottonwood trees already 10 feet tall in the corners where the seeds had found their footing. You couldn't see the soil from the road. You couldn't tell there had ever been a field here at all, but under everything, under the goldenrod and the thistle and the invasive grass and the young trees, was some of the most extraordinary agricultural soil in the world. Tama, silty, clay loam. Iowa black prairie soil. The kind of ground that formed under 10,000 years of tallgrass prairie, and that once you have pressed your hands into it, you never forget. It was waiting under 31 years of forgetting, and when I found it, I knew exactly what it wanted to become. Before we go any further, drop a comment right now and tell me where you're watching from, your state, your country, wherever you are in the world. I read every single one, because I have a feeling a lot of you have driven past a field just like this one, a field that used to be something, that could be something again. Tell me where you are. I want to know. What I found in the county records about this specific 40-acre parcel, the agricultural history going back to the 1880s, is something that changed how I understood what I was looking at. Because this field wasn't just forgotten. It was the end of a story that had started 140 years ago. Polk County sits in the center of Iowa, in the Des Moines River Valley, where the land flattens into the particular geometry of the Midwest. Square fields, straight roads, the horizon a perfect line in every direction. The county includes the city of Des Moines, but its agricultural edges are as productive as anywhere in America. Deep black prairie soil that has been growing corn and soybeans since the prairie was broken in the 19th century. The 40 acres I purchased sat on the county's western edge, far enough from the city that the landscape was still agricultural, close enough that the farmers' markets in Des Moines were a 40-minute drive. The surrounding fields, all commodity corn and soybeans, were some of the most productive ground in Iowa, and at the center of them, like a forgotten room in a productive house, sat my 40 acres of goldenrod and thistle and young trees. The county records told the story. The field had been farmed continuously from 1882 to 1991, 109 years of agricultural production by the same family across 4 generations. Corn and oats and hay, and a kitchen garden that the 1940s aerial photographs showed as a productive rectangle near the farmstead. The last active farmer, the 3rd-generation patriarch, had died in 1991. His children had inherited the land and had not farmed it and had not sold it and had not done anything with it for 31 years. When I called the estate attorney who handled the sale, she told me the heirs had felt guilty about selling it, that the land had been in the family for so long that selling felt like a betrayal. So they had held it, and the goldenrod had come, and then the thistle, and then the young trees, and 31 years had passed. I asked her if any of the heirs had ever walked the field. She was quiet for a moment. "I don't think so," she said. "I don't think any of them ever came back after the funeral." The soil test from this forgotten Iowa field, the number that came back from the Iowa State University Extension Lab after 31 years of nobody farming here, is a number I want you to hear, because it tells you something important about what happens to good land when you leave it alone. The first thing I did after closing was not clearing, it was testing. I pushed through the chest-high goldenrod in November, the stalks dry and rattling in the Iowa wind, and dug soil assessment holes at 12 locations across the 40 acres. The goldenrod was thick enough that I had to use a machete to reach each sample location. The thistle had gone to seed, and the seeds were everywhere, catching on my jacket and filling my collar and drifting in the cold Iowa November air. But under the goldenrod roots, the soil was something I had to crouch down and look at for a long time before I trusted what I was seeing. Black. Not dark brown, not dark red. Black. The deep, organic matter-rich, biologically extraordinary black of Iowa Tama silty clay loam at its best. The soil that made the Iowa prairie one of the most productive agricultural landscapes in the history of human civilization. The test results from Iowa State came back 2 weeks later. Organic matter. 2%. I called the Iowa State Extension agent who reviewed the results. A man named Dr. Willis, who had been testing Iowa soils for 23 years. 6.2, I said. Where is this? He said. Polk County western edge, I said. 40 acres that haven't been farmed in 31 years. A long pause. The prairie biology recovered, he said. 31 years of goldenrod and native grass succession on Tama silty clay loam, the mycorrhizal networks rebuilt. The organic matter went up, not down. How much organic matter does conventionally farmed Iowa ground have? I said. Typically 2 to 3%, he said, down from 6 or 7 when the prairie was broken. The forgotten field had more organic matter than the farmed ground around it. 31 years of forgetting had given it back something that 100 years of farming had taken away. The clearing decision I made, the specific choice about what to remove, what to keep and what to work around, is one that a conventional Iowa farmer would have done completely differently. And that difference is the reason this farm produces what it produces. Clearing a 31-year-old fallow Iowa field is not the same as clearing a forest. The vegetation is dense and tall, but the root systems are not the deep, established systems of mature trees. The goldenrod, the thistle, the brome grass, the young cottonwoods in the corners, all of it was manageable with the right equipment and the right sequence. But I did not clear everything. Along the northern boundary, a full 200-foot strip running the length of the field, I left the succession vegetation intact, not because I couldn't clear it. Because I could see in that strip the beginning of something that the surrounding commodity fields had eliminated entirely. Native Iowa prairie plant diversity, compass plant, prairie blazing star, wild bergamot, and the early stages of big bluestem grass establishment, the foundational grass of the original Iowa tallgrass prairie, were visible in the northern strip where the goldenrod was thinning and the native species were beginning their slow return. I had a prairie restoration ecologist from Iowa State, a woman named Dr. Chen, walk the northern strip with me. She crouched at every native species cluster, identified each plant, assessed the seed bank in the soil below. When she stood up at the end of the walk, she said something that changed the design of the entire farm. "You have the beginning of a prairie remnant here," she said. "It's thin and early, but the seed bank is there. If you protect this strip and augment it with a native seed mix, you'll have a functioning prairie pollinator corridor in 3 to 5 years. A pollinator corridor along the northern boundary of a specialty crop farm in Polk County, Iowa. Bees, native bees, monarch butterflies. The biological community that the commodity corn and soybean desert around this field had eliminated, coming back to the protected strip, and from there, moving into the production zones of the farm. I left the northern strip, I seeded it with Dr. Chen's native prairie mix, and I designed the entire farm production layout around the pollinator corridor it would become. When the clearing reached the old farmstead site in the southwest corner, the place where the family had lived for 4 generations, I found something I had not been told about. And what it told me about the people who had farmed this ground changed everything about how I understood this land. The farmstead site was visible in the cleared area as a slightly elevated rectangle, the old house foundation raising the ground a foot above the surrounding field. The house itself was gone, Demolished sometime in the 1970s according to the county records, but the foundation was intact, dry-laid stone that matched the era of the original 1880s settlement. Inside the foundation, protected by the stone walls that had sheltered a family for nearly a century, something was growing that I had not expected to find in a 31-year fallow Iowa field. Asparagus. An established asparagus bed, planted sometime in the mid-20th century when the family had maintained their kitchen garden, still producing in the protected microclimate of the old foundation. Not the thin, struggling production of an unmaintained planting, vigorous, healthy, the ferns above the crowns 5 feet tall in the shelter of the old stone walls. Asparagus crowns, once established, can live for decades without management. The family's kitchen garden asparagus had been growing in this foundation, unharvested, for 31 years. I sat on the old stone foundation wall and looked at the asparagus ferns and thought about the woman who had planted them. The 4 generations of a family that had farmed this ground, the kitchen garden that the 1940s aerial photographs had shown. The specific act of planting asparagus, a crop that takes 3 years to establish and then produces for decades, that speaks of someone who was planning to be in a place for a very long time. She had been right. The asparagus was still there. I built the new farmstead around the old foundation, the barn oriented to face the asparagus bed, the production garden expanding outward from the foundation's protected microclimate. The family's kitchen garden became the heart of the new farm. The design decision I made for this Polk County, Iowa farm, and specifically the element that every conventional Iowa farmer I described it to said was unnecessary and impractical, is the element that the Des Moines farmers market buyers respond to more than anything else we produce. Stay with me. A beautiful working farm is not an accident. It is a design intention, a deliberate choice to make the visual experience of the land part of what the farm offers, not separate from it. The 40 acres had extraordinary bones for beauty: the black Iowa soil, the northern prairie corridor, the old stone foundation at the farmstead site, the mature cottonwoods in the corners that I had left standing rather than removing. These were the permanent elements. Everything else was designed around them. The production zones, vegetables, herbs, cut flowers, small fruits were laid out in a pattern that balanced agricultural efficiency with visual coherence. Straight rows where straight rows served production. Curved beds where the land's natural contours suggested curves. Wide grass paths between the production zones that were maintained as turf rather than bare soil, giving the farm the quality of a garden rather than a field. The element everyone said was unnecessary: a designed perennial border running the full length of the farm's road frontage. 70 feet of perennial flowers, native grasses and ornamental herbs, echinacea, rudbeckia, salvia, catmint, ornamental grasses, creating a visual boundary between the county road and the production zones that was simultaneously beautiful, ecologically functional as additional pollinator habitat, and commercially strategic. The perennial border was the reason people slowed down when they drove past, the reason they turned around, the reason they stopped and asked what this place was. In Polk County, Iowa, surrounded by corn and soybeans for miles in every direction, a farm that looked like someone cared deeply about how it looked was remarkable enough to stop traffic. The farm sign went up the same week the perennial border went in. Within 3 weeks of the sign going up, I had my first farm stand customers. I hadn't advertised. The border had advertised for me. The first crop I harvested from this Polk County, Iowa Tama silty clay loam, and what happened when I brought it to the Des Moines farmers market for the first time, is something I want to tell you about specifically because it explains why the forgotten field was always worth finding. Iowa black prairie soil at 6. 2% organic matter grows everything with the particular abundance of soil that has been building biology for 31 years without being asked to produce anything. The first season's production had a vigor that I had not seen on any previously farmed ground. The root vegetables especially, which penetrate the Tama silty clay loam to depths that tell you the soil profile is as good as the surface suggests. Carrots, the first crop that told me everything about what this soil was capable of. I planted Danvers and Bolero varieties, heritage and modern, both reliable, in the directly amended Tama soil of the main production zone. The germination was complete and uniform. The thinning produced seedlings that were already stronger than anything I had grown on other ground. And the harvest, 12 weeks after planting in the warm Iowa September, produced roots that I held in my hands and looked at for a long time before loading them for the market. Long, deep orange, perfectly formed, flavor concentrated by the mineral richness of never-depleted prairie soil. I brought them to the Des Moines Farmers Market on a Saturday in September. I set them up in a simple display with a handwritten sign, Polk County Iowa Tama soil carrots, grown on forgotten prairie ground. An older woman, probably in her 70s, stopped at the table and looked at the sign for a moment. Tama soil, she said. My grandfather farmed Tama soil, said it was the best ground in the world. He was right, I said. She bought 3 pounds. She came back the following Saturday and bought 5. Something happened in June of the first full growing season that I want to tell you about, because it was the moment I understood that what I had found in this forgotten field was not just good soil. It was an ecological community that had been quietly rebuilding itself for 30 years. Keep watching. June in Polk County, Iowa, is the month when the land makes its intentions clear. The corn in the surrounding fields reaches knee height, and the soybean rows close their canopy, and the landscape turns the saturated green of Midwest summer. On my 40 acres, the production zones were in full early season growth. The carrots at their second leaf stage, the tomatoes establishing, the cut flower seedlings beginning to run. And on the northern prairie corridor, something was happening that Dr. Chen had predicted, but that I had not fully visualized until I saw it. The native prairie plants she had seeded in the corridor were in their establishment year, not yet at full expression, but present and growing. The big bluestem was ankle high, growing with the particular upright determination of a grass that will eventually reach 6 feet. The compass plant was a rosette of deeply cut leaves, preparing for the years it would take to reach flowering height. The prairie blazing star was a small spike of leaves that would be, in 2 more years, a column of purple flowers above the tall grass. But the insects had already found it. Native bees, not honeybees, but the native solitary bees of the Iowa prairie that the surrounding commodity fields had eliminated, were working the early blooming prairie flowers in the corridor. Bumblebees, mining bees, sweat bees, leafcutter bees, species whose presence indicated a recovering ecological community rather than the agricultural desert of the surrounding landscape. I walked the corridor at 7 a.m. on a June morning and counted 23 distinct bee species in 40 minutes. 23 species on a recovering prairie corridor in Polk County, Iowa, surrounded by thousands of acres of corn and soybeans. The forgotten field had been doing more than growing goldenrod. It had been holding biological memory for 31 years, and that memory was beginning to express itself. Year 2 brought something I had not prepared for. And it came not from the field itself, but from a conversation with a woman named Helen, who had grown up in the farmhouse, whose foundation I had built around. What she told me changed the way I understood everything about this land. Helen was 83 years old. She had grown up in the farmhouse on this 40 acres, had been born there, in fact, in 1940, delivered by a county doctor in the bedroom that had faced east toward the garden. She had learned to farm from her father, who had learned from his father, who had broken the prairie and planted the first crops in 1882. She had found the farm through the farm sign on the road frontage. She came on a Thursday morning in late May of year 2, driving herself, parking carefully on the grass verge, and walking to the farm stand with a directness that spoke of someone who knew exactly where they were going. When she saw the asparagus, harvested that morning from the bed in the old foundation, she stopped. "That's my mother's asparagus," she said. "Not asparagus like my mother's. My mother's asparagus. I brought her to the foundation." She stood at the edge of the old stone walls and looked at the asparagus ferns above the crowns and was quiet for a long time. "Mama planted these in 1952, she said. "I helped her. I was 12. 70 years. The asparagus crowns her mother had planted in 1952 in the kitchen garden of the farmhouse where she had been born were still producing in the protected microclimate of the old stone foundation. Helen sat on the foundation wall, the same wall I had sat on when I first found the asparagus, and looked at the farm. "It's beautiful," she said. "It looks the way it used to look when it was working." She came back every week for the rest of the season. She bought vegetables. She told me things about the land that no soil test and no county record could have told me. Which corner flooded in heavy rain, which section had the deepest soil, where the best kitchen garden ground had always been. Her knowledge of this land was encoded in the same place as her mother's asparagus, in the land itself, waiting. What the northern prairie corridor looked like in its 3rd year of establishment, and what Dr. Chen said when she walked it in August of year 3, is something I want to describe to you carefully, because it is the part of this farm that I am most proud of and the part that I did not design. It designed itself. Year 3. August. The northern prairie corridor, in its full 2nd year expression, the 1st year of real flowering after the establishment year, the prairie plant community beginning to look like what it is, a fragment of the ecosystem that once covered this entire landscape. Big blue stem at shoulder height, its 3-part seed head, the turkey foot, visible above the stand. Compass plant in full yellow flower, the tall prairie composite whose deep taproot can reach 12 feet into the Iowa soil and whose flowers have been providing nectar for prairie insects since before the European settlement. Prairie blazing star in its column of deep purple flowers, alive with native bees and monarch butterflies in the August heat. Dr. Chen walked the corridor for 2 hours. She photographed every species, recorded every insect visitor, assessed the establishment rate of the seed mix she had designed. At the end of the walk, she sat on the grass path at the corridor's edge and was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "This is the best 1st to 3rd year prairie corridor establishment I have seen in Polk County in 15 years of restoration work." "Why here?" I said. "The seed bank," she said. 31 years of goldenrod succession seeded the native species back into the soil. The seed bank was already here when you protected it. I just gave it help. The forgotten field had been seeding itself for 31 years. The goldenrod that had covered everything, that had made the field invisible from the road, that had signaled abandonment to everyone who drove past, had been doing the slow work of ecological recovery. The prairie was coming back. It just needed someone to protect the space where it was happening. The conversation that surprised me most in 3 years of farming this Polk County, Iowa field happened on a Tuesday afternoon in August of year 3. And it came from the commodity corn farmer who owned the fields on 3 sides of my 40 acres. His name was Gerald. He had farmed 1,200 acres of Polk County corn and soybeans for 38 years. He had watched the 40-acre forgotten field for those entire 38 years with the patient, practiced eye of a commodity farmer watching adjacent land. He had watched the goldenrod grow. He had watched me buy it and clear it and plant it. He had watched with particular attention the northern prairie corridor that ran along the boundary between his ground and mine. He came on a Tuesday in August when the prairie corridor was at its most spectacular, the big bluestem at full height, the compass plant in yellow flower, the blazing star in deep purple, the native bees and monarchs working every flower. He stood at the corridor's edge for a long time. "What is that?" he said. "Iowa tallgrass prairie corridor," I said. "Native species restoration." He looked at it. "The monarchs," he said. "I haven't seen monarchs in these fields in 20 years. They need the milkweed," I said. "The corridor has common milkweed establishing in the second row." He was quiet. "My grandmother talked about monarchs," he said. "Said there used to be clouds of them in August." He looked at the corridor for another long moment. "How much does it cost to seed something like this?" he said. I told him. He nodded once. "I've got a waterway on the south section that I've never been able to farm anyway," he said. "Always just mow it." "Dr. Chen at Iowa State does the design," I said. "She's good." He drove away. He called Dr. Chen the following week. The moment that completed the transformation of this forgotten Polk County, Iowa field, the moment that answered 31 years of goldenrod and silence, happened on a September morning in year 3 that I want to describe to you precisely. September, year 3. The farm at its most complete expression. The perennial border along the road frontage in its second full flowering year. Echinacea, deep pink, Rudbeckia deep yellow, ornamental grasses catching the September Iowa light, catmint blue-gray in the morning. The farm visible from the county road as a place of intentional beauty in a landscape of agricultural function. The northern prairie corridor at shoulder height, the big bluestem seed heads catching the September light, the native bee community established and working every flower, the monarchs still present in the warm September weather. The production zones at peak harvest. Tama, silty clay, loam carrots, heirloom tomatoes, dried beans, cut flowers, herbs. The asparagus from Helen's mother's crowns already harvested, and the ferns above them turning gold for autumn. The old stone foundation at the heart of the farmstead. The barn built around it, the kitchen garden expanding from its protected microclimate in every direction. And Helen, who had been coming every week since she found the farm, walked the full 40 acres with me on a September morning. She moved slowly, but she moved the whole way. At the production zone soil, she pressed her hand in and held it there. "Dad would have known this soil," she said. "He could tell good ground by the feel of it." At the prairie corridor, she stopped for a long time. "Mama used to talk about the prairie," she said. "Said she missed it. Said the farm used to have prairie flowers at the edges before everything got plowed up. At the asparagus bed in the old foundation, she didn't say anything. She just put her hand on the old stone wall and left it there. When we got back to the farm stand, she bought her vegetables as usual. Then she looked at the farm one more time. 'Thank you,' she said, 'for making it beautiful again.'" The 40 acres of forgotten Polk County, Iowa field is now in its 4th growing season. The perennial border attracts customers who have never been to a farm before. People who slow down when they drive past and turn around and stop because something beautiful caught their eye in the middle of an agricultural landscape. The prairie corridor is in its 4th year of establishment. The big bluestem now above head height in its mature expression, the compass plant in its 3rd year of flowering. Gerald seeded a prairie corridor on his south waterway. Dr. Chen has 3 other Polk County projects underway because Gerald told people about his monarchs. Helen comes every week. She brings her granddaughter sometimes, a girl of about 12, who has started asking questions about the soil and the plants and the prairie corridor that remind me of something I cannot quite identify until one week Helen tells me, "My mother asked exactly the same questions at exactly the same age." The asparagus that Helen's mother planted in 1952 in the kitchen garden of the farmhouse where Helen was born is still producing every spring. It will be producing when Helen's granddaughter is old. The forgotten field did not become a beautiful working farm because I made it beautiful. It became beautiful because beauty was always what it was capable of. The black Iowa soil, the prairie biology, the asparagus crowns, the seed bank waiting in the goldenrod roots. It was all there, under 31 years of forgetting, waiting for someone to remember. If this forgotten Iowa field meant something to you, if you watched this land come back and felt something, I want to hear from you. Leave a comment below and tell me, is there a forgotten piece of land near you? A field that used to be something? A place that someone loved and walked away from? Tell me about it, because the next farm on this channel might be the one you've been driving past your whole life. Subscribe right now, hit the bell, and come back next week, because every week on this channel is another forgotten field finding its way back.